This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. All right. Good morning, Kelly.
Yes, it is. It's a great morning this morning.
I'm a little cold, so I'm wearing the thickest sweatshirt that I have, so it looks a little informal, whatever.
But you're warm.
But I'm warm. That took priority over how I look, so apologies in advance.
Is what it is.
I'm a marketing guy, so
Marketing.
it's just how we do things, you know?
So a true marketing guy would have a sweatshirt that said Crisis Go on it.
I agree with you.
Anyway.
At least we got hats, so we're getting there.
So what do we got today? What's going on? What's happening around the world of school safety?
Well, we finished our little series, so definitely, if you're listening to this, I encourage you to listen to the last 4 episodes. Those were pretty great. They all go together all around the 4 phases. So this might be might just be a news article kind of podcast. So we'll be good. So the first one is going to be, I'll read the headline for you. Student arrested for bringing a gun to campus. It sounds super generic. So this was a couple days ago. Unfortunately, this is a headline that we see all too often lately.
You know, I think, like I said earlier, pre-production, I think we're seeing more and more of this, not less and less.
So my question I was going to ask you is, are we seeing more of this because there's actually more of it? Like, are there more students bringing guns to school, or are people becoming more confident in reporting it, or both?
So,
I know you probably don't even have the data to support anything.
Well,
but it's just a what if, you know?
But I will tell you, oftentimes there are changes in laws. There are changes in policies. There are things that, you know, we see as an outsider, we see as a marked increase, right? In activity, whatever that activity is. And so we automatically assume that it's getting worse. But it's not necessarily, because like you said, they're just reporting it more, the policy has changed where now they have to, as opposed to dealing with it internally, they have to deal with it by calling law enforcement. They have to press charges, those types of things, right? It might not indicate any uptick or downtick in the actual number of incidences. It may be they're being more educated because they're listening to our podcast, that they need to start looking more and they know more about what to look for. So there's all kinds of factors in there. But that there does, in just the anecdotal information that I have, and just, you know, us doing these every week, it seems like I'm hearing more and more about these, which concerns me. Either way.
Yeah.
So
either we're seeing more because it's truly more, or it's now we're actually seeing the real data around what's actually there.
What was actually happening. Yeah.
Either way, it's concerning.
Yeah. I'm to throw a little bit, just a small amount of politics into this argument. I'm not a gun control guy. I am this. If you choose to have guns, you should control them.
Yeah.
Right.
You shouldn't let your kid have access.
You shouldn't be.
That's crazy.
You know, I never did this, but there is a law in California that was generated because many cops did this. It's against the law, even for law enforcement, to leave your gun unsecured in your vehicle, your personal car,
Yeah.
right? So the theory is that it was locked once you locked your car, right? And that way you could keep it locked and away from your kids. Inside, it was outside, and you always had it if you left and went somewhere, right? But there were enough of them that were getting stolen that it's now against the law, and that officer can be charged with being it may sound silly, but for being a victim of a crime, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot easier to break a window than it is to break into a
It is.
safe.
So you can still lock it in your car as long as it's in a secured, like those little combination,
Yeah, yeah.
or even a key if you had a little under the seat or some sort of security case that is lockable and secured
Yep.
to the car. So you can't just have like one of those little I don't know what you call them. They're essentially a little metal box that has some sort of combination on it that you put your gun into, and you can access it. It's secure
Yeah,
from
sometimes they're
access.
either like a code or a biometric kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those don't count unless they're secured to the car.
Right. Because someone could just
Be-
take the box and
Box
smash it
and
and
smash it. Yeah. So, but there's more. I think there's more and more states that are doing one of two, and I wish they would do both, as requiring the primary owner of the gun to secure it at all times while at the house. So you have to have a safe. You have to
mm,
have some way of securing it. Just hiding it is not securing it.
yeah, because kids love to find things.
Right. Especially when you're gone and they're, you know,
Yeah.
they know that they have time to run through stuff. But the other thing that they do is there's a law. I think there's one in Virginia now, and in fact, I think that recent court case in Virginia where the 6-year-old shot the first grade teacher, his mother was charged with not preventing access, right? And she's in fact in jail for that. But to me, that if you're just have a law that says you have to secure it and prevent somebody from accessing it, but not defining how that's done is not necessarily enough, because it only becomes a
Mm,
problem when it becomes a problem,
right.
right? So
Yeah.
it's saying that if you don't secure it, then you're going to be charged, that's good. But if you don't define what that means, you're going to get the people who stick the gun up into the top of the closet because they don't think the kid can reach it, thinking that even small children aren't resourceful enough to grab a chair and see what's on top of the closet,
Yeah. Oh, what's
right?
that?
So I think they should do both. I think you should define how you secure it. I think you should have some sort of locking mechanism, and you should then also be criminally liable should somebody get access to your firearm.
Mm,
And there's ways to do that and provide relatively quick access to it for those. I get the
yes,
other side of that. So, but I think you
there are
need to
ways.
make sure there are ways. So,
Yeah, I think that would be a good chunk out of the problem for
mhm,
sure.
for sure.
And obviously, there's the education aspect of it. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of outside influences that are causing kids these days to not not value life as they should.
Yeah, yeah,
It's definitely a lot different than it was when I was in
yeah.
school
And
age.
it's not just other people's the value put on human life other than their
Mm,
own. They've reduced their own value, which is sad,
mm,
right? So there's more and more people, younger and younger, that are committing suicide, right? And
yeah,
as part of
yeah. We
that,
talked about that.
yeah, and there's more and more people who are prone to going back to the pathway to violence, they're more prone to resolving their issues with violence. And I'm not just talking about active threats at schools. I'm talking about solving just what used to be pretty minor spats, disagreements. I mean, we're
Yeah.
seeing it all the time where there's a road rage. Somebody cut somebody off. Somebody took somebody's parking spot.
Yeah.
All these things that are silly, stupid little things that people are pulling out guns on.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And again, this is not, I don't want to get into that debate. Well, if you didn't have the guns, you didn't have, that's not what this is about.
Right.
It's about people choosing violence as a solution to a relatively silly, from my
Mm.
non-professional opinion, relatively silly little problems.
Yep. It's like we're unable to handle our emotions anymore. It's just once it gets going, it's like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
There was a study released from Northern Europe somewhere. I want to say Sweden, maybe, that they're taking away technology. I might be getting my studies mixed up, but somebody's taken away technology from the schools. We've all been told you need to have technology in the schools. Everyone needs to have an iPad. Everyone needs to have a Chromebook, and all of your assignments need to be done on here because that's where people are going. The future is technology. While I don't disagree with that, what they have found is that with the use of technology, almost universally, students are doing more poorly on exams
So,
since the use of technology. They don't
no.
understand they don't understand the material. They don't understand theories and applications and critical thinking and those types of things that we've talked about, but wasn't necessarily connected to this. And this is what they're saying. So they've taken in several schools in this area. I want to say it was Sweden, but what do I know? But it was,
Some European country.
I think so. But now that I started to say that, it might have been here in the United States where they've taken away the technology and went back to the basics. And they've already seen like a 24, 26, like just right around 30% increase in comprehension, reading, just a huge step or huge increase in a relatively short period of time.
Wow. Go figure. You want to move on to the next one?
Yeah. Well, it's part of the same thing, I think, right?
I mean, it's kind of
It's
yeah. I
different,
mean,
but it's related, I think.
it's definitely related. I feel like
Yeah.
it's kind of like what in the world? I think it's less common, maybe. I would hope. Well,
I
I don't know.
Yeah, I
Maybe
don't know, because it is something that we look for. Go ahead with it, and then we'll get into it. But I don't think it's as uncommon as you think it is.
so. Again, I'll read the headline here. 2 girls caught with kill list at an elementary school. I think that's the part that gets me is like what how does an elementary kid even come up with a kill list? How
I'll tell you
what?
exactly how. How did they come up with? So we've talked about this before. How does a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old even know about the that suicide is a solution? Somebody
Yeah,
teaches them. Somebody tells them that.
they learn it
Internet, older brother,
somewhere.
older sister, you know, older friends. What? There's many ways, and just from a general rule of thumb. And this is sad that I'm going to say this. We have to stop being surprised about this stuff,
Yeah. Mm,
because surprise generally mandates that we take a pause and we go, "Ooh, what was that? Why? How?" Right? And most of us would say, that's a good thing. You should take a pause and examine what you have. That is true, but you shouldn't pause and say, oh, this isn't a 6-year-old, elementary school kid,
right. And
and then say, try to work your way around to justifying it, because that's what ends up happening is sometimes you try to, sort of say, oh, they're not serious. They're second graders, third graders, fifth, sixth graders,
they're just
whatever.
making a joke or whatever.
Yeah. And they try to justify it and explain it off, whereas it is significant when one person has it, right? When somebody starts writing down names, these are the people who I want to kill. It becomes significantly more significant, if that's a thing, when two people do it. Because you build trust into that relationship. I trust that they understand what I'm going through. I trust that they're not going to tell somebody and they're going to support me. And in many cases, when you have two people involved, you might have some encouraging,
right? They might feed off each
behaviors,
other and
feed off,
yeah,
and escalate quicker than they would on their own because they have somebody else to support them, to help them navigate obstacles. They have different options available to them now that they probably didn't have before, and so forth. So having that with two people is significant to me. They're probably, and there was some indication in the article that the teacher that found it reported it right away, which is good, right? And it's being handled in several different avenues, right? So it sounds like they're handling it correctly, but it is important for us and our mission to explain the potential there, right? And what does this mean? And we've talked about in threat assessments and some of the current practice is if you discover a threat and a kill list is somewhere on that pathway. If you have a threat and the subject who is making that threat, in this case the subjects who are making this threat, apologize and withdraw the threat, then that
it was just a joke.
It was just a joke.
Playing
We
a
didn't
game.
mean it. We were just playing a game. Yada yada yada. Right? We're sorry. We didn't mean it. So forth. When they say that, they downplay the threat and saying, okay, that wasn't actually a threat. It was what some people in threat assessments calls a transient threat, done in anger, no meaning behind it, etc. Right? Just kids being kids. Right? When you write a list,
that's got some intent to it.
That's got some intent to it, right? But again, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't deal with kids all of the time on a regular basis with the amount of engagement with these kids that teachers do. And I understand the need. But I did spend 34 years dealing with people who tried to apologize to me for murder after they did it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Can I go? No.
What?
Right. And many other different crimes. I'm sorry, just let me go. I didn't mean to do it. I was just trying to whatever, right? And trying to downplay it and so forth. And I understand that not everyone in this world is good or has good intentions. There are times when good people do bad things and that we need to deal with what we have. And in some cases, we have to establish that you should have known better, right?
Right.
And that you should have known that this was not a good thing. Sure, can we deal with it different than sending a 10-year-old to prison for the rest of their life? Yeah, sure. But there needs to be consequences, whatever the appropriate consequences are. There needs to be, you can't just say, oh, they said they were sorry. No, that doesn't work. And in fact, in many cases, I believe that theory without proper training and understanding is significantly contributing to the status and where we're at today with threat assessments. That we're not providing appropriate consequences to the level of actions that were taken. We're too quick to blame it on an IEP, an individual education plan program, depending on where you're from, a 504, a disability. We're too quick to blame it on or excuse it because of. Just because somebody is on the spectrum or they have an IEP, a 504, have a disability, doesn't mean that they're not a threat. And in some cases, they're more of a threat. We've talked about this threat a couple of times in a couple of different podcasts and contexts. I had a student who was a pretty high level threat on the spectrum, high functioning autistic, spent most of his day in special ed classes. Once in a while, a couple of classes, he was in general ed. He was pretty intelligent. He just couldn't be around other people, right?
Mm.
And there were some cases and circumstances where he could be, and other cases and circumstances where he couldn't be. High level threat, reported to a suicide hotline that he was going to shoot up his school. And we got to him, and he was high level. The only reason he didn't do what he said he was going to do was he couldn't figure out how to get access to a weapon. That's the only thing. And self-admittedly.
That was the one stone he was missing.
Yep. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's the one piece he was missing, right?
Wow,
Significant piece. So
scary.
Right? But here's the deal.
Crazy.
Because of his disability and his medical status, there were people who saying, this isn't his fault. This isn't his fault. He can't help this. Yes, he can. He knows right. You can talk to him and he'll tell you, yeah, I know I'm right. And I know this is going to hurt my parents when I do this, when I figure this out. This is going to, he's reasoning and saying, I don't care. He's not saying, what do you mean? Of course I can do that.
Right.
Of course that's okay to do. He's not saying that.
Yeah.
He's saying, I understand. And that one of the reasons I really don't actively try to do this is because I know how much it's going to hurt my mom when I do this. Not if I do this, when I do this. Right? So there's conscious there. There's things that you say, this kid absolutely knows what he's talking about. Right? But his disability allows him to disregard what most of the rest of us would say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I want to, but I ain't going to do it.
Right.
And never head down that path. And so sometimes your disability allows you to not think of the consequences.
Yeah.
Right? You understand that it's wrong, but you don't care about the consequences.
Man.
Does that make sense? So
yeah, no, I mean it's kind of a scary thought, but yeah.
Yeah, but the point there is sometimes they're more likely to do something wrong because of their disability. Not that they're not capable because of their disability. It's some people are more likely to do it because of their disability.
Mm.
Right? They get angry quicker for seemingly much smaller wrongs that were done to them. Right? And so in some cases, you have to take that in and say, they could be more likely to commit this crime or this act because they don't have any filters saying that I shouldn't do this.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful how I say things, but yeah, I mean, it seems like sometimes there's filters that are missing, and it's that like that part may not be their fault ish, and like in your case, it's the guy, he's saying, I know what I'm doing. Like a lot of these kids are actually really, really smart. Like
very
really smart.
Very smart, right? But if they don't have the filters, or they're more likely to act out or be disruptive or what have you, or magnify the influences, or there's lots of things, then you have to take that into consideration. And I will prove my point here. politically, on both sides of the aisle, there are almost no disagreements. I'm sure there are some people somewhere that we shouldn't allow people with mental health issues to have firearms. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
So, I mean, the argument then comes in, define mental health, right?
Yes,
Mental health issues.
where
But in the general conversation, we all agree that people with mental health issues, and
Yeah.
some of those are defined by significant depression, suicidal thoughts, that their mental and emotional status is causing them to think of harming themselves and or others, those types of things. But the fact is that we are on both sides of the aisle, we're agreeing that people who have disabilities through mental health issues should not have access to firearms. So if that's the case, then we are also saying that they can be more likely to generate a threat. They're more likely to follow through with a threat.
Yeah, I think there's a strong argument. Like if you have someone who's, there's proof or there's data, right? There's a history of suicidal thoughts, violent thoughts, things like that. I think there's definitely a strong argument there for
in some states, and I can't say all states, but in some states, if you are admitted involuntarily, and in some cases voluntarily, to a psychiatric hospital for episodes, however that's defined, but generally it's you're threatening to hurt yourself, you're a danger to yourself or others, then if you have firearms, that allows law enforcement to get a warrant to seize those firearms and take them away from you. If you have a CCW, then that voids that CCW, right? So, and I'm going to say most states, but I don't know that.
Yeah, there's
all states.
There's definitely a couple. Really, there's definitely a couple states are at least it implemented that red flag law, and a lot of them are trying to do it.
Yeah, where, some of them are. Yeah, I don't want to get into that.
Yeah, where I get into like part of it is you give people that just they're taking like anxiety medication. Are you?
Yeah.
It gets kind of like.
Yeah,
and it's where a lot of people are.
Where I get, and I'll leave it with this because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, is where regular citizens who have zero training or expertise in this area can report and claim and request that you seize somebody's firearms.
That would feel wrong to me.
Yeah, I think there's, but
yeah, you could just do it with malicious intent,
Yep. Yeah, you could do it for political reasons.
Right.
And that's wrong. And I think this is, a little bit where I kind of want to reiterate. I do think we've seen it a couple of times recently, or at least I've had conversations with people about this recently, where there still is a misunderstanding, I believe, between a threat in a school environment and what constitutes a threat in a school environment and what constitutes a criminal threat in a law enforcement environment. So I do think there has to be understanding, and I think we have to get this better communicated more. And I think we will as we move further and further down this road. But we often hear, especially after an incident, well, he was contacted by law enforcement. Law enforcement said he wasn't a threat. And 2 weeks later or a month later or a short time later, he or she was found shooting up the local school or a festival, or, it's not just a school, but commit some heinous act of violence shortly thereafter. Here's the difference. In almost every state, in order to constitute a criminal threat, there has to be a bona fide threat and the means to complete that threat, right? So it's not a bona fide threat if I say, Ethan, I'm going to kill you. And even though I have firearms, so I have a means to do that, except for one thing.
I'm many miles away from you.
You're 600 miles away from me.
Either it's going to take you a long time or you're a really good shot.
Right? Now that becomes a little bit, I'm oversimplifying it,
Sure.
but it becomes different if I say I'm going to kill you and then I get caught driving across the New Hampshire border.
Yeah.
That becomes a whole different issue.
Yeah, you don't come
Right?
to New Hampshire very often,
Right.
so.
Right. Especially New Hampshire. But it becomes a different issue. If you don't, like I said, the only reason this kid at the school I was talking about earlier wasn't arrested, he had no means to, was he a high level threat? Yes. We were waiting for one thing to happen.
Man. And it's like he
And
could, it doesn't have to be from his parents. It like could be from anything.
we're in Southern California. You can get a firearm. It was easy to illegally obtain a firearm in the state of California, even with all the gun. It's
I was
easy.
going to say they have one of the most strictest gun laws, and it's
It's easy. All he's got to do is walk up to some gangster on the side of the road and say, "Hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you think?" Yeah, okay. Give me a couple $100 and we're done, right? It's not difficult, but he couldn't figure that out or didn't want to. Because he was, like I said, he was not a stupid kid. He was pretty smart. Conversation was good. I mean, it wasn't, he admitted he knew what we were talking about. He knew exactly, he told us his plan, all of this stuff.
wow.
So, I mean, he wasn't, like I said, he was an intelligent kid. He was on the spectrum. So he had some issues, but he was a high level threat. But I couldn't arrest him as a law enforcement officer. I wasn't at the time. I was working for the school district. As a law enforcement, if I had been a law enforcement officer, I couldn't arrest him. And in fact, we had law enforcement people on the threat assessment team doing this assessment. When we, the law enforcement people with my background and them got together, we said, yeah, we're missing the ability to carry it out. So, but that doesn't mean he's not a threat.
Yeah. I mean, even though that's like kind of, I feel like that's a pretty big piece. Like we were saying, it would take a lot to complete that.
Right. Yeah.
That could literally be the next day and that could be completed.
So we were looking and we had access to his social media by parents' permission. We had one, they had gone through a divorce, and part of the reason they got divorced was because they couldn't agree on the parenting style. One parent was pretty good on pretty much there needs to be consequences, and the other parent was, it's not his fault. He can't control this. This is you just let him do whatever he wants to do, kind of thing. So, but that was part of it. So we had access to, so we kept monitoring his social media and things that he had access to. And we were waiting for some research. How do I get a firearm? What would be the way? We were waiting for some sort of actions, the next step, right? And
would
that never
would
came,
that have been enough to take further action? Just the searching of it to show the intent, not the actual physical, actually getting it.
The obtaining of the weapon, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's not just the physical presence of the weapon, but the act of trying to obtain it. So there's you and I can talk about committing a crime together, and that would be theoretically considered a conspiracy, right?
Right.
What?
Yeah. Conspiracy to commit or something, right?
To commit a crime.
Yeah.
But the conspiracy is only completed when there is an overt act in the furtherance of the conspiracy.
Okay.
So just talking about it's not really sufficient. We needed him to to take some step. And as far as I know, to this day, I don't think he ever has. And that was 6 or 7 years ago, which surprises me actually. So because he had multiple targets in mind.
Wow.
And we did our due diligence and called the active shooter police and said, hey, this is a potential. Thanks for letting us know. We have these that you'd be surprised how many that this school gets. So, I mean, we have to understand that. So we say this all the time. There's not a yes or no answer, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about doing a threat assessment, I used to, I've changed the title of this. It's a stone wall versus a brick wall. But you have to take all of these little pieces of information and lay them down, put some mortar there, connecting it, and so forth, if you want to build a wall. I used to use a brick wall, and I'll explain to you why I kind of went away from that and went to a stone wall. And to me, visually, a brick wall was uniform. They were big pieces, whereas a stone wall generally those stones are not uniform, so they have different sizes. They mean different things, metaphorically speaking. You have a bunch of little ones. You might have a big one, and then you put the mortar down to hold them all together. The mortar is the context of the assessment. What is the context of this piece of information, and how does it fit into, or does it fit into this threat assessment? And at some point, you're going to have all of these stones, whether they're big stones, little stones, medium-sized stones, and they're going to be inserted into your wall. And at some point, you're going to say you have a threat, and it will come clear to you the subjective evaluation or analysis. People want data, they want all this objective information, but the reality is when you take all of that information, it comes down to an opinion that you can support through your experience, training, and the information you've collected to say, yep, this is a threat. Because at some point, if it is a threat, you're going to have to take some sort of action that may have legal consequences. So you're going to have to be able to prove that and articulate that this was a threat. And this is why, even if it's not a criminal threat. So let's say we'll take my student as an example, and I'll say, you know what, we're going to expel you from school because you made this threat. We don't have enough. We've already told the cops and we've already consulted each other, and we've all said there's no threat here yet, right? And there's no criminal threat. But there was a threat, and we're still that, even though, or in fact, because we could not arrest that student, he's still entitled to an education. So if I remove him from his right to have an education, do I open myself up to litigation? I do, right? Parents can sue to get their kids back into the school. So,
or they move and they just bring them to another school, and if they don't have all that information, then they're just starting from scratch.
Yep. But the fact is if I remove the child, I have to establish a legal reason to remove that child from. And there's lots of reasons I can do it, but there has to be a legal reason. And if I'm going to legally remove this kid from his right to have a public education, then there's potential for a lawsuit, right? Saying,
wow,
you are depriving my child the right to his education. So we have to have the documentation to keep it legal, right? And to establish that should we have some legal action taken against us. And there were several times when we had legal actions taken against us for the removal of their children. Threats are no different. But understand that there's a criminal level, and there's a level of threat somewhere below that still is a threat. And just because the cops can't take legal action and arrest the child or because of suicidal risk or what have you, put them into a secured mental institution. Just because they can't do that doesn't mean that they're not a threat. And in fact, they can be a high-level threat. Now we have to take steps to mitigate that. How do we mitigate that? How do we intervene? How do we provide them with support? How do we measure success or failures of those supports? So we've talked about this before as well. The purpose of threat assessments. The initial purpose is to determine, one, if they're a threat, and two, what is the level of that threat.
Mm.
Right? The next step is to determine the appropriate intervention, right? And that appropriate intervention is predicated on, is there a threat and what the level is. If it's a high level threat and it's criminal, they go to the jail. If it's a high level threat and there's some psychological issues going on, you might take them to a secured mental health facility. If it's lower, you may require counseling, right? Or some other emotional support mechanism. Some like requiring them to report to the school and subject themselves to a search before they actually enter the school. Right. So those types of things, whatever works for you, but you just have to have a plan, and it has to be articulated in policies, and you have to be trained in that per, our 3 pillars. Because you have to, the policies, the training systems have to be in place. So yeah, I think once we start understanding threats and actions, we can better protect our kids. Right. And
Yep.
And if I'm right, and we are seeing more incidences of people bringing guns to school, there's a reason for that. You just have to figure out what that reason is. Because, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, security and safety is right at the bottom, or foundational. It's not higher on the pyramid, right? So if kids don't feel safe, they can't reach their potential. If teachers don't feel safe, they can't reach their potential in teaching our kids. Many people, kids and adults, if they don't feel safe, they will try to find a way to make themselves feel safe. Is that what we're seeing in schools today? I don't know, right? Is that what we're seeing with the increase of guns being? I know several have said, "Look, I brought this gun, but I had no intention of shooting up the school. I use it for protection because people are threatening me on the way to school, and I felt that it was better for me to bring it into the school in my backpack than ditch it into the weeds or under a bush or under a rock or what have you, and just leave it out there, right?" That's what some of them are saying. If they're going through that, they actually might be right.
Yeah.
Not that I'm condoning any of that behavior, but
Right.
but if they're going to do it, I'd much rather have them have control over that, so some other kid doesn't find it, and now all of a sudden we have a
Missing weapon and
missing weapon
unknown
or
intent.
yeah, and or just an accident. Like, is this playing with it and unintentionally hurts themselves or others? So yeah. I mean, it's a thing, and we have to address it. But let me say this: until we, as a one society, two as a profession in the education world, we take responsibility for the threats and what they actually mean, as opposed to saying, well, the cop said, and trying to blame it on somebody else. It is, they said it wasn't. You need to ask the questions, because the same set of circumstances means something different to everyone else who has a different perspective, right? I think we talked about this a little bit, and I'll leave it with this. Early on in my emergency management function with the sheriff's department, I learned that when somebody went out to check the behavior of a fire, for a long time, we relied on the fire department to tell us what the fire was doing and what the fire behavior meant. And then there was a circumstance where I got the information I was a lieutenant at the time. I got the information and it just didn't seem right to me. It didn't seem right. And so I made contingency plans. And we talked a little bit about this in the last podcast. So I made plans to do something in case I was right and they were wrong. We call that the 10th man theory. And after that, I got it just became important to me that I understood that the same set of circumstances, the same information meant something different to the fire department than it did to the sheriff's department. So to counter that, I always sent a sheriff's deputy with the fire observer, but it always meant something different. So I needed the sheriff's deputy to look at the same set of information, the same set of facts, and what they were observing. And I needed them to interpret it to how that fact set impacted the sheriff's office, because that meant I had information that was usable for me. What that instance taught me was that the same set of facts means something different to people who have different perspectives and different responsibilities. And the way that we interpret those facts is based upon our experience and our knowledge and our skills and how it impacts us. So from that point on, I insisted if the fire department was going to go scout a fire then and tell us what the behavior of the fire was at any particular time, that I always sent a sheriff's deputy to interpret that same set of facts in consultation with the fire department. They're the ones that are fire behavior experts. But they're also interpreting that data based upon their needs. I need that data interpreted on my needs as a sheriff's deputy, because they're trying to put a fire out. I'm trying to plan evacuations and security issues. So two different things. So we have to take what we have and look at how we interpret that data. We have to learn to interpret that data and how it impacts us. Same is true for threats.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.